The 27th floor of Blackwood Industries hummed with the quiet efficiency of a predator at rest. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Manhattan's skyline, but Dante Blackwood rarely bothered to admire it. Beauty was a luxury he'd stripped from his life long ago, along with sentiment, compassion, and every other weakness that might compromise his edge. At 34, Dante had built an empire that made grown CEOs tremble. His name appeared on Forbes covers, with titles like The Destroyer and America's Most Ruthless Mogul. He wore these designations like badges of honor, each one representing another competitor crushed, another fortune absorbed into his ever-expanding domain. This morning's board meeting was no different from countless others, a carefully orchestrated execution disguised as business strategy. The target sat across the mahogany conference table, James Morrison, founder of Morrison Tech, a small but innovative software company that had made the fatal mistake of refusing Dante's acquisition offer 6 months ago. The market analysis is clear. Dante's voice cut through the room like surgical steel. His eyes, the color of winter storms, never left Morrison's face. Morrison Tech's patent portfolio would increase our AI division's value by 40%. Their refusal to negotiate has left us no choice but to pursue alternative acquisition strategies. Morrison's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Blackwood, my client has repeatedly stated that Morrison Tech is not for sale at any price. This is harassment. Dante's smile was arctic. Harassment is such an ugly word, counselor. I prefer market dynamics. He nodded to his assistant, Victoria, who distributed folders with clinical precision. As of this morning, I've purchased the debt portfolios of Morrison Tech's 3 largest clients. Their contracts are now void. I've also acquired controlling interest in their primary server farm. Service terminates at midnight. The color drained from Morrison's face. You can't do this. These are legitimate businesses with employees, families. I'm doing this, Dante interrupted. Your company will be bankrupt by Friday. You can sell to me now for 20 cents on the dollar, or you can lose everything and sell to me next week. For 5 cents? Your choice? Morrison's hands shook as he leafed through the documents. 20 years of innovation, hundreds of jobs, dreams, and aspirations, all reduced to numbers on Dante's spreadsheet. The man's eyes filled with tears he fought to contain. You're destroying lives, Morrison whispered. I'm conducting business, Dante replied without a flicker of emotion. Sentiment is expensive, Mr. Morrison. You clearly couldn't afford it. The meeting ended with Morrison's signature on the acquisition papers, his dreams of independence sacrificed on the altar of Dante's ambition. As the devastated founder and his team filed out, Dante's board members congratulated him with the enthusiasm of sharks sensing blood. That evening, Dante stood alone in his penthouse apartment, a monument to successful isolation. The space was a study in minimalist perfection, black marble floors, white walls adorned with expensive abstracts he'd never bothered to actually observe, furniture that prioritized form over comfort. Every surface was spotless, every angle calculated for maximum visual impact. He poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch and walked to his wall of windows. The city sprawled beneath him, millions of lights representing millions of lives he neither knew nor cared to know. Somewhere down there, James Morrison was probably explaining to his wife why Daddy's company no longer existed. Somewhere else, Morrison's employees were updating their resumes and wondering how they'd make next month's rent. Dante felt nothing. He'd trained himself not to feel, had surgically removed empathy from his emotional repertoire the same way others might remove a troublesome appendix. Emotions were complications, vulnerabilities that his enemies could exploit. He'd learned that lesson at 8 years old. Abandoned at a state facility by parents who'd decided he was too expensive to keep. The scotch burned his throat, but even that sensation was muted, filtered through layers of carefully constructed numbness. His phone buzzed with messages from financial reporters, business partners, and social climbers, hoping to bask in his reflected success. He ignored them all. Tomorrow would bring another target, another acquisition, another victory in his endless war against a world that had shown him no mercy. The iron crown he'd forged from others' failures sat heavy on his head, but it was the only crown he trusted. After all, kings who showed weakness didn't stay kings for long. The protest signs came into view 3 blocks before Dante's limousine reached Blackwood Industries. "Save our community! Homes not profits!" and Blackwood Heartless bobbed above a crowd of roughly 50 people gathered outside his building's gleaming entrance. Dante barely glanced up from his tablet as his driver, Marcus, navigated around the demonstration. "Security?" he asked his assistant, Victoria, without looking away from quarterly projections. "Building management says they're peaceful, just making noise about the Riverside development," Victoria replied, her voice as emotionless as her employer's. "Shall I have them removed?" "Unnecessary. They'll disperse when they realize I don't care." But as the limousine pulled to the curb, Dante's attention was captured by a woman at the protest center. She stood on an overturned crate, her voice carrying, clearly through his bulletproof windows as she addressed the crowd with passionate intensity. Auburn hair caught the morning sunlight, and even from a distance he could see the fire in her dark eyes. "Blackwood Industries wants to tear down the Riverside Community Center to build luxury condos," she called out. "They want to erase 30 years of programs that have kept kids off the streets, helped families find housing, provided job training for single mothers. They see dollar signs where we see lives." Dante stepped from the limousine, and the crowd's energy shifted. Protesters pressed closer, their chants growing louder, but the woman on the crate held his attention. She was pointing directly at him, now her gaze unwavering despite the security guards moving to intercept. "There he is," she shouted, "the man who thinks he can buy and sell human dignity." Their eyes met across the crowd, and Dante felt something strange, a jolt of recognition, though he was certain he'd never seen her before. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that. There was an intensity in her expression, a conviction that seemed to burn from within. It was foreign to him, this kind of passion for something beyond personal gain. Security formed a protective corridor, but the woman jumped down from her crate and pushed through the crowd with surprising determination. She reached the edge of the security perimeter just as Dante was about to enter the building. "Mr. Blackwood," she called out. "Celeste Rivera, Riverside Community Center. I'd like 5 minutes of your time." Dante paused, struck by her directness. Most people who wanted his attention went through channels, offered something in return, or approached with carefully calculated deference. This woman simply demanded his time as if she had a right to it. "Ms. Rivera," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the crowd's noise. "I don't negotiate with protesters." "I'm not protesting," she replied, stepping closer despite the security, guards' obvious discomfort. "I'm talking. There's a difference." Up close, Dante could see the intelligence in her eyes, the way she held herself with quiet confidence despite being surrounded by his people. Her clothes were simple, jeans, a blue sweater, worn sneakers, but she wore them with the kind of dignity that couldn't be purchased. 5 minutes, he found himself saying, surprising everyone, including himself. Victoria's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, the equivalent of shocked gasps from anyone else. Security looked confused, and the crowd fell silent, sensing the unexpected development. Celeste Rivera smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Thank you." They rode the elevator to his office in silence, but Dante found himself studying her reflection in the polished steel doors. She didn't fidget, didn't seem awed by the building's opulence or intimidated by his presence. Instead, she appeared to be gathering her thoughts, preparing for battle. His office, a temple to corporate power with its commanding view and museum-quality art, seemed to make no impression on her. She walked straight to his desk without invitation and placed a manila folder on its pristine surface. "These are the numbers you care about," she said without preamble. "Cost-benefit analysis of destroying the community center versus the long-term. Social impact. Crime statistics, educational outcomes, property values in the surrounding area." Dante remained standing, arms crossed. "I have my own analysts, Ms. Rivera." "Your analysts see spreadsheets. I see people." She opened the folder, revealing photographs of children in classrooms, elderly people in exercise programs, families at community events. "Maria Gonzalez, 73, comes here every day for senior programming. Without it, she'd be alone in her apartment, slowly dying of isolation. Tommy Chen, 15, would be running drugs for the corner gangs if he wasn't in our after-school program. Instead, he's building computers and dreaming of MIT. Touching stories, Dante said, though something in his chest felt oddly tight. But sentiment doesn't change zoning laws or construction timelines. Celeste's eyes flashed. "Is that what you think this is? Sentiment?" She stepped closer, and he caught a hint of her perfume. Something clean and simple, like rain on leaves. "Mr. Blackwood, when did you last care about something besides money?" The question hit him like a physical blow. When had he last cared? He couldn't remember. Care was a luxury he'd abandoned along with hope and trust and all the other weaknesses that had made him vulnerable as a child. "Care is expensive, Ms. Rivera," he said, unconsciously echoing his words to Morrison. "I can't afford it." She studied his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. It was as if she was looking for something, searching for cracks in his armor. "I don't believe that," she said quietly. "I think you're afraid to care. I think someone hurt you so badly that you decided it was safer to feel nothing than to risk feeling everything." Her words struck too close to truth, and Dante's. Defensive walls slammed into place. "Your 5 minutes are up, Ms. Rivera." But she didn't move. "The community center means everything to the people who depend on it. It's not just a building, it's hope. And hope, Mr. Blackwood, is the only thing that's truly priceless." As security escorted her out, Dante found himself staring at the photographs she'd left behind. For the first time in years, he couldn't concentrate on work. Instead, he kept thinking about a woman who'd looked at him and seen something worth saving. Part 3. Cracks in the foundation. For 3 days, Dante told himself he wasn't thinking about Celeste Rivera. He conducted meetings, reviewed acquisition targets, and made decisions that affected thousands of jobs with his usual clinical efficiency. But her words echoed in his mind like a persistent melody. "When did you last care about something besides money?" On Thursday evening, he found himself in his limousine outside the Riverside Community Center. He hadn't planned to come here. He'd told Marcus to drive him home, but somewhere between his office and his penthouse, he'd changed the destination. Now he sat in the back seat, watching through tinted windows as life unfolded in the modest brick building he planned to demolish. Through the large windows, he could see children in what appeared to be an art class, their faces bright with concentration as they worked on paintings. In another room, adults sat in a circle, some with babies on their laps, engaged in what looked like a support group meeting. The scene was so foreign to his world of boardrooms and power plays that it might as well have been happening on another planet. Then he saw her. Celeste emerged from a side door, carrying art supplies, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was laughing at something one of the children had said, and the sound carried across the parking lot, even through his closed windows. When had he last heard laughter that genuine? She noticed the limousine immediately. For a moment, she stood frozen, supplies balanced in her arms, staring at the dark vehicle. Then, with characteristic directness, she walked over and knocked on his window. Dante hesitated, then lowered the glass. "Are you planning to sit out here all night, or would you like to see what you're destroying?" she asked. Before he could respond with his usual deflection, he heard himself saying, "Show me." The community center smelled of chalk dust, coffee, and something indefinable. Warmth, perhaps, or belonging. Celeste led him through rooms where children practiced piano, teenagers worked on homework, and elderly people played cards. Every person they passed greeted her with genuine affection, and she responded with the kind of attention that made each individual feel valued. "This is our computer lab," she said, opening a door to reveal rows of older but well-maintained machines. "Most of these kids don't have computers at home. This is where they learn skills that might get them scholarships, jobs, futures beyond what this neighborhood typically offers." Dante found himself studying the teenagers hunched over keyboards, their faces illuminated by screen light. One boy, maybe 16, was coding with intense focus, lines of programming language flowing across his monitor with impressive complexity. "What's he working on?" Dante asked. "David's building an app to help low-income families find food pantries and free meal programs," Celeste replied. "He taught himself programming using YouTube videos and library books. Now, he's applying to Stanford." Something twisted in Dante's chest. At 16, he'd been aging out of the foster system, sleeping in shelters and stealing food to survive. This boy had the same determined hunger in his eyes. But unlike Dante, he was using his drive to help others rather than destroy them. The merger documents lay spread across Dante's desk like a battlefield map. Hartwell Industries, his latest acquisition target, would be the crown jewel of his empire, a multi-billion-dollar telecommunications giant that would make him one of the most powerful men in America. The only obstacle was a small zoning issue that required demolishing several blocks of low-income housing and community facilities to build the massive data center that would anchor the deal. The Riverside Community Center sat directly in the center of that zone. Dante stared at the architectural plans, seeing Celeste's face in every line and measurement. For 2 weeks since his visit to the center, he'd tried to return to his normal routine, but normalcy felt like a costume that no longer fit. He'd catch himself wondering what David was coding today, whether Mrs. Gonzalez had made it to her senior exercise class, if Celeste was eating enough. She'd looked too thin when he'd seen her. "Sir," Victoria's voice cut through his reverie. "The Hartwell executives are here for the final signature meeting." Dante nodded, straightening his tie. This was it, the moment that would cement his legacy as the most successful corporate raider of his generation. So why did he feel like he was about to sign his own death warrant? The Hartwell team entered his conference room with the confident swagger of men who believed they were making a smart deal. CEO Richard Hartwell, a silver-haired man in his 60s, smiled as he shook Dante's hand. "Blackwood," Hartwell said warmly, "ready to change the telecommunications landscape forever?" "Among other things," Dante replied, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. As the lawyers droned through final contract details, Dante's mind wandered to a conversation he'd had with his head of security that morning. Someone had been asking questions about the Riverside project, specifically about him. When pressed for details, Marcus had reluctantly admitted it was Celeste Rivera. She'd been investigating him, learning about his past, his business practices, his involvement in her community's destruction. The thought made his stomach clench with an emotion he couldn't name. The meeting was interrupted by Victoria's urgent whisper in his ear. "Sir, there's a situation in the lobby. Ms. Rivera is here with a reporter from the Washington Post." Dante's blood turned to ice. Through the conference room's glass walls, he could see elevator lights indicating someone was heading to his floor. In minutes, Celeste would discover exactly who was behind the community center's demolition, not some faceless corporation, but the man she'd begun to trust. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Dante said, rising from the table. "I need to handle something." But he was too late. The elevator doors opened, and Celeste stepped into his reception area, accompanied by a woman with a press badge and a camera crew. The Moment Celeste saw him through the glass conference room wall, her face went white. Their eyes met across the distance, and Dante watched every emotion play across her features. Confusion, realization, betrayal, and finally, devastation. She'd been holding documents in her hands, but they fluttered to the floor as the truth hit her like a physical blow. She'd trusted him. Despite every reason to be suspicious, despite his reputation, she'd begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was capable of change. And he'd been planning to destroy everything she loved all along. The reporter was speaking rapidly to her camera crew, sensing a story. But Celeste wasn't paying attention. She was staring at Dante with the kind of pain that cut deeper than any business rival's hatred ever could. Without a word, she turned and walked back to the elevator, leaving her scattered papers behind. Dante found himself moving before conscious. Thought took over. He excused himself from the merger meeting, ignoring Hartwell's protests, and caught the next elevator down. He found Celeste in the lobby, standing perfectly still in the center of the marble floor, surrounded by the chaos of reporters and cameras, but somehow separate from it all. "Celeste," he said quietly. She turned, and the look in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "From the beginning." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Around them, reporters pushed closer, cameras rolling, but they might as well have been alone in the universe for all the attention either paid to the circus. "You let me show you around," she said, and her voice broke slightly. "You let me introduce you to the children, to the families. You let me believe." She stopped, unable to finish. "I never lied to you," Dante said desperately. "Everything I felt. Everything that happened between us." "You let me hope," Celeste interrupted, and now tears were streaming down her face. "You let me believe that maybe someone like you could care about someone like me. About people like us." The cameras were capturing every word, every tear, every moment of her public humiliation. Dante wanted to shield her from it, to make it all stop, but the damage was done. "Celeste, please, no," she said firmly, wiping her eyes. "You made your choice, Mr. Blackwood. You chose money over people, power over love. You chose to be exactly what everyone said you were." She walked away then, pushing through the crowd of reporters toward the street. Dante stood frozen, watching the only person who'd ever seen good in him disappear from his life forever. Upstairs, Richard Hartwell was waiting with barely concealed irritation. "What the hell was that about, Blackwood?" Dante looked at the merger documents, at the architectural plans that would erase Celeste's world, at the contracts that would make him richer and more powerful than he'd ever dreamed. Then he looked at his reflection in the conference room windows, a man in an expensive suit with empty eyes and an emptier heart. "The deal's off," he said quietly. "What?" Hartwell's face turned red. "You can't be serious. We've invested months in this." "I said the deal's off." Dante's voice was stronger now, more certain. "I'm withdrawing from the merger." The room erupted, in chaos. Lawyers shouted about breach of contract. Hartwell threatened lawsuits. Victoria stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had, but for the first time in 30 years, Dante Blackwood felt like he might be finding his soul. Part 5. The Man Reborn. The headlines were merciless. Blackwood's billion-dollar breakdown. The Destroyer destroyed. From Titan to tragedy. Financial news networks ran the story on endless loops. Dante Blackwood, America's most ruthless corporate raider, walking away from the deal of the century for reasons no one could understand. Dante's board of directors called an emergency meeting. His largest investors demanded explanations. His lawyers warned of lawsuits that could bankrupt even him. He ignored them all. Instead, he stood in his penthouse at dawn, looking out at a city that felt different now, not like territory to be conquered, but like a community where real people lived real lives. His reflection in the glass showed a man who looked older, more weathered, but somehow more alive than he'd been in decades. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, business partners, and opportunistic rivals sensing weakness. He'd turned it off hours ago, preferring the silence that allowed him to think clearly for the first time since childhood. The intercom crackled. "Sir?" Marcus, his driver, and one of the few people he trusted, sounded hesitant. "There's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." Dante's heart leaped, hoping against reason that Celeste had come to see him. But when the elevator doors opened, it was Victoria who stepped out, carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression he'd never seen before, something that might have been concern. "You need to see this," she said without preamble, placing the folder on his glass coffee table. Inside were financial projections, legal documents, and news clippings. The numbers painted a stark picture. Walking away from the Hartwell merger hadn't just cost him money. It had triggered a cascade of consequences that threatened to topple his entire empire. "Hartwell is suing for breach of contract," Victoria explained. "Morrison's filing wrongful termination claims on behalf of the companies you've acquired. 3 major investors are pulling out, claiming loss of confidence in your judgment. Your net worth has dropped by 60% in the last week." Dante studied the documents with detached curiosity. A month ago, these numbers would have sent him into a strategic fury. Now they felt like abstract concepts, important to someone he used to be. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Bad. You'll survive, but the empire you built, most of it's gone. The board is moving to remove you as CEO of your own company." Victoria sat down across from him, and for the first time in their 7-year working relationship, she looked at him like a human being rather than a corporate machine. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Help me understand why you threw it all away." Dante was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to explain something he barely understood himself. "Do you know what it feels like to be hungry, Victoria? Really hungry? The kind where you'd steal food from children if you had to?" She shook her head. "I was 8 years old the first time I felt that, abandoned at a state facility by parents, who decided I was too expensive to keep. I learned that people who have power use it against people who don't. So I decided to get power, lots of it, so I'd never be vulnerable again." He stood, walking to the windows that had once made him feel like a king surveying his domain.